KIBH-FM Seward Public Radio, SAKtown Talk. And let me verify that, is this thing on? There we go, yeah. There we are, we're live. With me today at SAKtown Talk, I'm kind of going to be off screen. We've got some new software we're trying out, and we're going to go to a multi-camera setup here soon. You kind of see me. Yeah, see, there's my back of my head. We'll get that other camera up and running so we can switch back and forth, but you're just going to see mainly Doug, which is, apropos. And we're doing whatever. It's not annual. It's a hit and miss, but for years now, we've kind of got together over the holidays and talked about some of the different historical aspects of the holidays in the Seward area, the Resurrection Bay. And we're going to cover some previously trod ground and maybe talk about some new things.
Sure.
You've got Rockwell Kent, see a couple of his publications there on.
Yeah, a few Christmas stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see I've dressed up for the occasion.
Yeah, it's a little chilly here in the studio.
This is Alaska radio.
Yeah, there you go. I'm not hearing this. That's the only thing. Let me make sure this is on. Is this thing on? Doesn't seem to be. Okay, so I didn't have the mics up, so that's unfortunate. So
we'll start again.
Yeah, let's just start over again. We can fix it in post. This is KIBH-FM Seward Public Radio, and SAKtown Talk for a solstice edition. I have in the studio here with me Doug Capra, and he's a local historian and writer. And I'm just simultaneously verifying our broadcast here on YouTube on my cell phone, so you might have heard a little of that going on. But Doug is in the studio with me today, and we're going to talk some history, some holiday history for Seward and Resurrection Bay. Welcome.
Thank you. And I don't know if they picked it up, but I wanted to let you know I'm dressed up in my special for Alaska gear here tonight.
Well, yeah, and I've been keeping it. This temperature in the studio is seasonal.
Yeah, this is Alaska radio.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All we're missing is a few icicles.
Right. Yeah. So I thought we might do a few Christmas stories here today, or at least talk about that, and anything else you want to bring up too. You could do.
Yeah. No, I think we before when we were off camera, pre-camera, we were talking about of course Rockwell Kent. It's been featured in multiple previous editions of SAKtown Ramblings and SAKtown.
Is this showing?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, if you show it right up there.
All right, how's that?
Yeah,
this is just, I've published the Rockwell Kent Fox Island Christmas several times over the year. I think the first one I wrote was in 2012, and then it's been published several times. That's one of the versions in the Seward Journal. And we can talk about that a little bit today if you want to. But just, it's interesting, about a week ago, I got a email from a Saturday Evening Post writer who's wanted to do a story on this and wanted to talk to me. So I didn't even know the Saturday Evening Post was still around anymore. I never see it on the newsstands, but apparently it is. I think they do 6 issues a year, and they have an online edition. So it should be the Fox Island Christmas story. It should be on Saturday Evening Post digital, which I don't think you can get unless you have a subscription. But,
right, you got to subscribe. It's
right.
paywalled, yeah.
Yeah, but if I can, I'll be able to get on and make a copy of it, and then I'll publish it.
Great.
Yeah.
So Saturday Evening Post, and that's the so it's Rockwell Kent, but who's the
Norman Rockwell. In fact, I just after I got that call from the Saturday Evening Post writer. I thought to myself, gee, I wonder if they've ever done an article about Rockwell Kent's relationship with Norman Rockwell.
So he had one.
Oh, yeah,
Two
yeah.
Rockwells. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
yeah. In fact, when Rockwell Kent came to Alaska in 1935, he had a grant to do a mural, and he wanted to gather some research. He was only here for about 2 weeks. But when went up to Nome, some old-timers, 1935, some old-timers came up and said, oh, you got to come out to our cabin. We want to show you all the stuff we have for you. And he went out to their cabin several miles out of town. And all pasted up on the log cabin walls were these Saturday Evening Post images by Norman Rockwell. And Rockwell Kent, and he's writing this. He's telling Norman Rockwell about this in a letter, and he's saying, "You owe me now." He said, "Because I just said, oh, this is wonderful, thank you very much." He just pretended to be Norman Rockwell, didn't want to disappoint. But it got kind of dicey in the 50s during the McCarthy era. Rockwell Kent was, by that time,
He was on a list.
He was on a list, and he was a avowed socialist and everything else. And so Norman Rockwell was a little annoyed at that point by getting mixed up.
Identified with him.
Yeah. And then there was the other Rockwell, Lincoln Rockwell, who was the head of the American Nazi Party. And both of them sometimes got mixed up with that guy. So it got confusing, but that's just a little funny story about Rockwell Kent and Norman Rockwell. They knew each other, and they respected each other. In fact, in 1935, or somewhere around there, by 1935, Rockwell Kent was one of the most famous artists in the United States. And Norman Rockwell writes to him in a letter, says, I don't mind getting mixed up with you. He said, if I had as much media attention as you, if I were as famous as you, I'd appreciate that. I mean, you ought to be annoyed at being mixed up with me, because I'm not as well known. He wasn't as well known as Rockwell.
No publicity is bad publicity.
Yeah. So anyway, we're talking about the Rockwell Kent Fox Island Christmas, and he wrote about that first in his book Wilderness, A Journal of Quiet Adventure in Alaska. And I thought I'd show you this little version. This is a modern library version
Let me go
of
ahead
it.
and hold it up. Yeah, that's pretty dense there. Yeah. You might need your spectacles.
Yeah.
If you're like me. And
But that was Rockwell Kent. If you're familiar with the name Bennett Cerf was a famous publisher, and Kent had a relationship with him, and Bennett Cerf started the Modern Library.
it's illustrated also.
Oh yeah, it's the same. It's basically the first edition printing. What it was. But then later, Kent took the Christmas chapters out of Wilderness, and he published them in a little book by the American Artists Group, and this is it's called Northern Christmas. That was in 1941.
So that's a kind of a short form.
Yeah, just the Christmas story out of Wilderness he published there, and
Okay.
this edition now was out of print for a long time, but as I wrote the forward, to the 1996 edition of Wilderness, published by Wesleyan University Press. That's Wilderness. At the same time, they published. This is my copy. My forward is in this one.
That's a little. I can tell it's a more recent printing.
Yeah, more recent. Yeah, printing.
And I have a forward by you in it.
Yeah. So those are in this one. I never see this in Seward at any of the bookstores. I see Wilderness. People carry Wilderness. This is a beautiful little Christmas present.
Yeah, well, we should work on Forest Tides and Treasures and some of the other shops around town that stay open year round.
Yeah, because I know Forest Tides and Treasures carries my book. I don't know if it carries Wilderness, but anyway, and just a couple of other things. This picture that I painted here is not actually from Alaska. That's it's a Kent Greenland. He was very traveled and very connected to the Greenlanders, and so here's a good friend of mine, another Kent scholar named Jake Ween, has made these postcards out of them. And Jake also made a postcard Jake was able to get the original copy of the first woodcut that Rockwell Kent ever did, and the first one he did out on Fox Island, and there's a picture of a Christmas tree. So now Rockwell Kent was his third wife Sally said he was an incurable romantic. He really was. I mean, you've got to understand, he comes out of the 19th century, really. He was born in 1882. So he's raised as a late Victorian gentleman, and he carried a lot of those traits with him throughout his life. And so these holidays like Christmas, were very, very important to him. So out on Fox Island, for many reasons, he wanted to make sure that Christmas was a special occasion for his son and for the old Swede out there, the Alaska pioneer, Lars Olsson. I mean, Kent didn't have a lot of money, so...
That's a classic Swedish name, Lars Olsson.
Lars Olsson. Oh, yeah, I know. I mean, you can imagine how difficult it is researching him to find the right Lars Olsson. Yeah. But I did a whole series on my website. I did like a 10-part series on his life, the information I could find. I found out he was a very important pioneer. He came to Alaska in the 1880s, and he worked in Canada and on the border area, Circle City, 40 Mile, those early areas, and he worked with some of the well-known Canadian miners and stampeders, the early ones up there. And Kent tells some of those stories that Lars Olson told him. He writes them in Wilderness. So
There's a street, I forget the name escapes me. There's a famous Swede who went to Nome, and it's got a street named after him in Anchorage. It's probably the most famous one, but I can't remember his name, so I don't know why I brought it up. But, yeah.
The other story, we move off of Kent. The other story is the Christmas tree up on the mountain. This is I think one of the prettiest pictures.
Yeah,
taken.
absolutely. I think I saw this very picture posted here recently.
Yeah.
And that's hard to make out. But, that's the church.
Yeah.
And that's the
Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
St. Peter's.
Yeah, St. Peter's. Yeah.
Which is it's the oldest church in Seward. I think between 1905 and 1906 it was built. Mm-hmm. And there's a chapter that talks a little bit about that in my book, The Spaces Between.
So was Rockwell Kent? He was kind of a progressive of the time, kind of a dilettante, and so.
A progressive? No, he was a socialist.
Oh, okay. So
clear,
far beyond
clear socialist.
Yeah.
I mean, later he was accused of being a communist, but he never joined the Communist Party. And I find that occasionally I'll run into people say, "Oh yeah, he was a communist." I say, no. The irony of that statement is the communists didn't want him. Uh-huh. He was too much of a maverick. Okay, he wouldn't. He just didn't follow party lines. In fact, they hired him. I can't remember what organization. Some communist-associated organization asked him to go down to South America and check out a dictator down there and come back with a report that said he was a fascist. Oh. Kent went down there and did the report and said, no, he's a totalitarian leader, but he's not a fascist.
So who commissioned it?
They didn't like
more or less
a socialist organization. No, a communist organization, a communist-connected organization in the U.S. They wanted him to go down there to classify, and Kent wouldn't do it, and they didn't like that, So, I mean, he was. And then he got called up before the McCarthy Committee, I think 1953, and very, very early, he was one of the early ones who refused to. What was it? Kent asked him, "Oh, are you a member of the Communist Party?" And Kent refused to answer the question.
Yeah.
And Kent wanted to read a statement to him. McCarthy wouldn't let him read the statement. The statement.
McCarthy was notorious for.
And then after the hearing, Kent went outside and read the statement to the press. Mm-hmm. And he said, the irony is that everybody knows I'm not a communist. I mean, it's been published all over the place. I'm a socialist, not a communist. And he read the statement, and essentially he accused McCarthy of trying to overthrow the government of the United States, which was a radical thing to do at that time. That pretty much
turned the tables on him. Huh?
But that pretty much alienated him from even friends and from the art world in general. Amazing. That was kind of the nail in the coffin that helped to end the popularity of his art. Part of it was the abstract expressionists were becoming popular, and the more realistic artists and illustrators were kind of pushed into the background. That was happening all around him too. But his politics was getting more and more radical for a more conservative public.
So how involved was he in the ferment of the world? You had so this was around World War I, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this was before the Bolsheviks and Ralph Reed and all that. So was he involved? Did he ever get involved with all that?
No. Yeah. I mean, he was never, he got in, and during World War I, he was a pacifist. Mm-hmm. And he got involved with helping to free some of the pacifist prisoners, draft resistors.
Right. So he wasn't a friend of Woodrow Wilson then?
Not particularly.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't think he wasn't a friend of many politicians. I mean, he had an anarchist streak.
Yeah.
In him, freedom. Freedom. In fact, his sexual attitudes, his love life, harkened back to, I don't know if you're familiar with Shelley, Mary Shelley, and Percy Shelley, and Mary's mother, Wollstonecraft, who wrote a feminist tract on freedom. You know, these anarchists back in the early 1800s.
Not the hippie kind of conception of free love.
But it was, you know, they just believed that any institution, any government institution that took any freedom away from people, anything, was not good, and so interestingly enough, they lived, to some extent, they lived conventional lives.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So I was asking earlier about Rockwell Kent. I was getting at, was he church affiliated? As Episcopalians?
He was raised as an Episcopalian, and at maybe the age of 10, 11, 12 years old, he had a real epiphany, a religious epiphany at that time. And for a while, he was really religious. We're getting into Kent. I'll tell you these interesting stories now. He used to, in his younger years, when he was going to art school in New York and studying at Columbia University, he was studying architecture, he would approach prostitutes on the street and try to convert them, you know, get out of this business and everything. And this happened, I'm trying to think, this happened maybe about 1915, 14, maybe 1914 or so, when he's in New York, and his wife and kids are living not too far away, but they're not in New York City with him. He went to New York from his home, and he was going to come back the next day. But as he's walking down the street, after what he was doing, he approached this prostitute on the street and started talking to her, you know, and some policemen came up and arrested her for soliciting him.
Oh,
and so he tried to explain to the policeman, no, I came up and was talking to her. She wasn't doing anything. And the police said, I don't care, we're going to arrest her. Kent spent an extra night in New York so he could go to her hearing the next day and explain to the judge that she didn't...
He was proselytizing her.
Yeah, he was just talking to her.
Yeah.
You know, so, I mean, he had this this Victorian streak.
So that must have led to some sort of conflict at some point.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He's out on Fox Island. I write about this in the stuff I've written, which I call the unquiet adventure or the not so quiet adventure. I mean, he's going through hell on Fox Island, in addition to the beauty and everything else. I mean, between his marriage falling apart, the other woman that he's writing to, also that his wife knows about, the war is going on. He's a pacifist. The influenza epidemic is happening. The north wind is driving him crazy out there in the winter. He can't get to Seward. The mail isn't working. The steamship companies were on strike. They're having a conflict with the federal government, so the mail was lost. The darkness out there, you know, between all of that, and at one point he writes to his wife. He says, you know, he's so desperate. So he says, last night I was on my knees praying. I don't know to who, but I was praying. I mean, so the conflict. There was a conflict in him. I think these artists, these big creative people like Kent, massive egos, they have to have because they have to believe in themselves. But beneath it, there is a tremendous amount of insecurity, and it was with Kent too. You know, and he'd go out to wilderness areas like Alaska on Fox Island, and he would see the massive mountains and the sea and the sky, and that would give him awe.
Yeah, it dwarfs you.
Who's out there? I mean, am I alone here? Is there a God? These things were always part of his life, not that part of his inner life. So there's the Christmas tree on the mountain story, which that radio show up in Anchorage, and I think it's a YouTube show too. It's called The Big Alaska Show.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, Steve Stripling, yeah.
Steve called me.
He heads it up, yeah.
He interviewed me for the Christmas story this year, so that's going to be running sometime. I don't know. Maybe you know more.
Well, I need to hook up with him anyway. Since he comes down and sometimes he announces for the polar bear jump.
Yeah.
So, and we've talked in the past about getting that show on the air here. So with the TV, now that we have a TV station here, in the spring we'll be able to throw some of that programming on, the video programming, and I think that's the best venue for that show.
Good,
so,
good. Do you want a story? I'll read a story.
Sure, yeah,
okay.
go ahead.
I don't know when I published this. I published this story a few years ago. a Christmas story, Seward, Alaska, an Alaska Christmas story, I think. It's an interesting one. It's a very unusual one, and I have a quote at the beginning of it. Well, the story I call An Alaska Christmas Tale, Another Kind of Story. And I have a quote. I started with a quote. History, in the end, is only another kind of story, and stories are different from the truth. The truth is messy and chaotic and all over the place. Often it just doesn't make sense. Stories make things make sense, but the way they do that is to leave out anything that doesn't fit, and often that is quite a lot. And my introduction to this story is, there are some stories that hide beneath the surface of history. Evidence strongly suggests there is actually a tale to be told, but it remains latent. The historian is confronted with a question. Am I imagining this? Or is there really a narrative peeking out behind the external sources here? There are clues, but the historian is forced to make a leap of faith. Sometimes lack of evidence can be circumstantial evidence. The details we leave out of a story we tell can be as revealing as the ones we include. Well, this is one of those stories. I learned about it from outside newspapers outside of Alaska and expected to find much more information in the Seward Gateway. In fact, I expected it to be a big local story. It wasn't. Instead, I found nothing, at least nothing about the story I was seeking. At first, I was puzzled, but as I continued my research, I began to see the big picture, and it started to make sense. I'd just been looking for the wrong story. So here's the story. It was just supposed to be a winter hike a week before that Christmas in 1936. The Northern Life Insurance salesman from Seattle had ventured from Seward to Moose Pass, hoping to secure some new clients. The ice looked safe, so Manly Sweezy ventured out onto the frozen marshland 4 miles from town. Then the surface broke beneath him, and he sunk up to his waist. Once on solid ground, out of the water, he could feel his clothing and skin begin to freeze, and he found it difficult to walk in the deep snow. With a 4-mile trek ahead of him in frigid temperatures, he may have wondered whether he would ever make it back to Seattle to join his wife and 3 young daughters. He was probably fortunate to have even made it to Alaska with a major mariners' strike in progress. But now he was stuck here, and there was no way he'd make it home with his family for Christmas. Over 37,000 waterfront and seafaring workers, members of 7 federal unions, had gone on strike in October 1936. More than 120 ships had immediately tied up at Pacific ports, and the strike would soon reach the East Coast, once some vessels at sea tied up in New York. Meanwhile, back in Seward, during that week before Christmas 1936, the adults had a secret to keep, especially from the children. The Alaska steamship Santa Claus vessel, the SS Yukon, with Old St. Nick aboard, lay silent at its West Seattle moorings, already 10 days past its sailing time to Alaska. Santa, with his $2,000 worth of candy and gifts, couldn't possibly arrive on time to greet 6,500 Alaska children. And what a special Santa, all 225 pounds, 6'3" of him. This Claus needed no pillow as stuffing in front. Since 1933, George Pointer, in his 30s, unmarried and chief steward aboard the Alaska steamships SS Cordova, had played the role of the company's Santa. It was good public relations and made great press. Quote, Santa Claus may come south from the Arctic regions by reindeer or even by airplane in these modern times, the Associated Press reported. But he left for the north today by boat on the famed old gold ship Victoria. Well, that was in 1935, the year before. And George Pointer had with him 6,000 toys, storybooks, games, embroidery sets for girls, airplane models, wooden dump trucks, and mechanical lifts, and 6,000 sprigs of holly for the women, all provided by Alaska Steam. Quote, some of the children rushed me when we gave away the gifts, he said. Some cry, they are so happy. Some are frightened. Some sort of edge up to me and then run with the gifts. I guess my feelings are just as mingled as theirs. It's the biggest thrill of the year for me. In past years, everyone in Seward always knew when the ship would arrive, and as it edged into the harbor toward port, the vessel's carolers and orchestras performed Jingle Bells, Holy Night, and other popular Christmas carols, blasted through the loudspeakers on the bow. The music echoed and bounced off the nearby mountains as both adults and children rushed to watch the ship dock. This was a moment everyone in Alaska coastal towns anticipated and cherished. The last year, 1935, the SS Victoria had departed Seattle at 9 a.m. on Seattle, December 14th, with plans to dock at 10 Alaska ports. The ship arrived in Seward at 6 a.m. on December 21st. A very eager few youngsters met the vessel, but it was too early for most. Santa and his entertainers immediately hopped aboard the Alaska Railroad and visited towns along the rails, including 170 new settlers, pioneer farmer families from the Matanuska Valley. Quote, "It's a big day for the tourists," the press reported, since it was their first Alaska Christmas. The colony's manager, Russ Sheely, noted that, quote, "This is really the first time all the colonists have assembled. All along the route, schools were dismissed, and in Anchorage, Santa and his crew broadcast a special program over KFQD Radio, the world's farthest northern commercial radio station." Early the next day, the entourage returned by rail to Seward for the town's celebration. After breakfast, the local youngsters, dressed in their best and dragging their parents along, excitedly rushed down to the dock, their breath visible in the crisp morning air. The youngsters often marveled at the ship's mast, often decorated like Christmas trees. As they scrambled up the gangplank and entered the lounge, where they lined up and visited their turn to sit on Santa's lap, the children were soon joined by all children within mushing distance, as together they met with Santa around the huge tinsel-decked evergreen tree. Seward resident Karen Schwartz recalled that day. She wrote of the experience, "While we waited, my dazzled eyes wandered over the red plush and gilded splendor of the huge salon, and the Christmas tree, so beautiful with all the brightly colored ornaments and glittering with the lights. Santa gave each child a toy, as well as candy and a treat, a popcorn ball, a red net stocking full of nuts or fresh oranges and apples. The ship's orchestra played holiday music to the accompaniment of the singers. Later that day," now this is in 1935, "Santa made a special visit to the Jesse Lee home. Several hours later, the ship unloosed its lines and left the dock. A few families waved goodbye. They had one more stop, a visit to Cordova's children, before returning to Seattle." Those were memories from 1935. But now it was 1936 in Seward, and the Seward Gateway had been getting stories along the wires since early December about George Pointer as Santa stuck in Seattle aboard the SS Yukon with all those gifts and candy for Alaska children. The Associated Press played the story up, and the articles appeared all over the country. The mariners' strike was the big news throughout the nation. Meanwhile, life insurance salesman Manly Sweezy managed to hike safely back to Moose Pass after falling through the ice. He realized he was lucky to be alive. As Christmas approached, he probably thought of his wife, Pauline, and his 3 daughters, Martha, age 12, little Pauline, age 9, and Patricia, age 8. Christmas wouldn't be the same for him in Alaska without his family back in Seattle. That's part 1. Part 2, and I introduced part 2 with a quote. And you'll recognize the quote. "It came without ribbons, it came without tags, it came without packages, boxes, and bags. And he puzzled and puzzled till his puzzler was sore. Then the Grinch thought of something he hadn't thought before. What if Christmas, he thought, doesn't come from a store? What if Christmas perhaps means a little bit more?" That's from How the Grinch Stole Christmas by Dr. Seuss. So, we'll be back to the story. Let me just take a break here. The 1936 Mariners' strike had started months before Christmas, and by the end of October, 1936 had become serious. Lumber mills and warehouses had shut down. Ports from Alaska to New York to Mexico suffered, with more than 150,000 Union men on strike. On October 31st, the Alaska Railroad gave notice of a complete shutdown since there was neither freight nor passenger service. Seward Mayor D.C. Brownell spoke for many Alaskans. He said, "I, for one, certainly protest the proposed shutdown of the Alaska Railroad. The excuse of saving a few dollars operating expenses is not valid. Personally, I can see no motive but a political one, adverse to the present administration." More than 300 ships were tied up at U.S. ports. The November election brought Franklin Delano Roosevelt back to the White House for 4 more years. Democrats won 317 House seats and 74 Senate seats, with Republicans taking only 71 House and 18 in the Senate. With the election over, there was tremendous pressure on U.S. Maritime Commission and the president to intervene in the spreading strike. Meanwhile, overseas, the Spanish Civil War continued, with fascist warplanes accused of killing dozens of women and children in Madrid. In Germany, Hitler consolidated his power, and in Italy, Mussolini was ready to go to war to defend his expanding empire. Meanwhile, in Seward, citizens debated these and other issues in the bars and cafes, but life went on as usual, with a big dance on October 31st and a turkey shoot on November 8th. Some food supplies were getting slim, but there was no alarm. It would probably be a turkeyless Thanksgiving, but baked ham or stuffed leg of lamb, that would be fine. And there was always moose meat. Seward knew what it was like to be isolated and took conditions in stride. Local truck farms had supplied stores with plenty of vegetables and eggs. Well, Thanksgiving came and went, with the boys from Sunday school classes delivering home-cooked dinners to the elderly bachelors in town. Hopes had been high for a strike settlement, but now it looked like the conflict would extend into the new year. Seward's children, especially those of the most vulnerable age, knew that Santa usually arrived via Alaska steam, and they anticipated his arrival. The event was a highlight of the year and a memory they cherished all their lives. Were they told of the situation? How does one explain a strike to a child? How do you tell a 3-year-old there'll be no Santa this year? Or did the adults in time devise another tactic? Young children have short attention spans, and their focus often can be easily diverted. The Seward Gateway covered the mariners' strike in detail, as well as other local, territorial, and national world news. But none of the Associated Press stories featured in outside newspapers and highlighted in the Seattle papers about George Pointer as Santa being stuck aboard the U.S. Yukon in port. None of these stories ever made it into the pages of the Seward Gateway. It became the big story that wasn't a story at all, because it was so significant that it might dishearten the souls of Seward's youngest and most innocent. The non-story was probably the talk of town. All the adults and older children knew, but the town's mission became to protect its children from the news. The Northern Light insurance man, Manly Sweezy, who had fallen through the ice near Moose Pass, returned to Seward, no doubt thinking of his wife and 3 young daughters back in Seattle. Christmas for him wouldn't be the same without them. He wondered how he would spend Christmas Day. There were no doubt that invitations from locals had existed, but sitting around a dinner table with the family would only remind him of his own family so far away. By December 17th, when the Yukon still hadn't left Seattle, people knew for certain. That evening, the Methodists had a special Christmas music program in the Episcopal Church. A community choir assembled representing all 3 churches in town, Methodist, Episcopal, and Catholic. Following the music, the children performed a special King Arthur in Search of the Holy Grail program, complete with spectacular costumes. 2 days later, everyone began practice for the December 23rd Community Christmas Tree Festival at the school auditorium. Both adult and children's choirs provided entertainment. Quote, Santa Claus will be the chief performer of the program, the Seward Gateway announced. Quote, with something in his bag for every child. Local Santa, Stanley Duke, who everyone said was built for the job, quote, brought the youngsters to their feet with shrieks of laughter when he entered the hall. All 3 local churches joined forces to create a special evening for the community, with 1st through 4th graders in featured performance. For many years, a lavish, decorated Christmas tree had been set up at the intersection of 4th Avenue and Adams Street, but for several years that spot had been empty. This year, the tree returned, all 20 feet of it, and ablaze with lights courtesy of the City Council and Seward Light and Power. By December 23rd, more articles appeared in the outside press emphasizing poor Santa's plight, stuck in Seattle aboard the Yukon with all his candy and gifts, unable to make it to Alaska. Although they were wired, these articles, the Seward Gateway continued to ignore them. No word of Santa's predicament ever reached print in Seward. Since 1910, Sacred Heart Catholic Church had celebrated midnight Mass on Christmas Eve. At a time when ecumenism wasn't the trend, the three Seward churches often set aside doctrinal disputes and focused on unity during the holiday to create choirs and programs. The music and ritual at midnight Mass attracted a significant number of Protestants, as well as the unchurched. But when the Matanuska colonists arrived the year before, 1935, Seward's popular priest, Father Merrill Saltzman, was reassigned, and that year, 1935, there had been no midnight Mass. So in 1936, Father Saltzman was back for a visit, and the community held several gatherings to welcome him. Quote, "The popular young priest has drawn about him, since he has been in Seward, all his old friends and a host of new ones," the Seward Gateway reported. This year, Saltzman, along with resident pastor Father William Chappett, would celebrate a special midnight Mass. All Saltzman's friends, the newspaper wrote, quote, "will want to see him at the altar again and to hear the message that he will bring to them of that first joyous Christmas morning." A 12-voice choir would render Leonard's Mass in B-flat, interpreted, quote, "in accord with the gorgeous solemnity portrayed by the service." That Christmas Eve of 1936, every pew in Sacred Heart Catholic Church was packed. People sat on the stairs leading to the choir loft, which itself was full. Groups stood at the church entrance by the door. Extra chairs filled the aisles, and some even crowded into the sacristy. Father Merrill, this is a quote, Father Merrill Saltzman was at his best in his fluent address on the Christmas spirit that was so manifest in Seward this Christmas season, the newspaper wrote. Even though Santa had arrived on the Yukon, or even though Santa hadn't arrived on the Yukon, that spirit, quote, was seen everywhere in exchanges of greetings. More than 230 people attended that midnight Mass. After the service, some wandered by Seward's outdoor 20-foot tree with its, quote, breathtaking beauty and many colored lights. As one looked up at 4th Avenue from the railroad dock, the tree's lovely charm was spellbinding. Quote, "That early Christmas Eve, it was especially enchanting," the Seward Gateway observed, as it trembled and weaved in the gusts of wind, the lights sparkled, vibrating with the motion. On Christmas Day, 1936, Manly Sweezy wandered down to Seward's snow-covered beach with a grill, some wood, and a few moose steaks. He brushed aside the snow, started a fire, and grilled his dinner. He couldn't be home for Christmas, so he tried the next best thing, sitting by the waters of the same sea that washed by his home along Puget Sound. He could at least be near his family in spirit. He was happy to be alive. Later that day, he secured passage on the SS Arctic. He had one more stop for business in Valdez, then he'd be on his way back home. So yeah, there you have another little Christmas story.
You evoke the period, the steamships, and the way way the word used to travel. Apparently, how Santa used to travel.
How Santa used to travel, yeah. I mean, that was a very important part of Alaska culture. Santa on the steamships, on the ports, in the ports particularly. Now, they had a different kind of a culture up north, in the interior. At least before the rail, once the rail got in there, they could go up to Fairbanks if they wanted to.
So when did the line get completed all the way to Fairbanks?
1920. Well,
that was when Harding came
it
and
went
drove the spike.
in July of 1923. It made it to Nenana.
Mm-hmm.
They still had a few bridges to build, so it was several months later before they made it all the way to Fairbanks. Probably late 1923, early 1924 to Fairbanks.
So did Rockwell Kent was he a contemporary with the railroad, or is he before?
Oh yeah, he was here. He came in 1918. The railroad started construction in 1915.
Mm-hmm.
The war kind of slowed it down. And then Kent was here in 1918, just the war ended that fall. And then the railroad was completed in 1923.
So did he ever write any stories or do any artwork about the
No,
railroad?
not about the railroad. He did take a ride on the train with his son, and I don't know how far they went. I don't think they'd gone to Anchorage. I don't think they went further north. Yeah.
So I think one of the other things we were talking about, as far as Christmas around Resurrection Bay and in Seward, was the Christmas tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Christmas tree was right at the corner of 4th and Adams Street. In fact, in some of the old pictures, there used to be a flag post up there. too. In the earliest, go back to 1906, 1905, and you'll see a big pole up there with a flag on it.
So, and that's on the hill where the present day lighted Christmas tree is?
Oh no,
this is down below.
Now it's down by the Sea Life Center.
Yeah, so that's the official Christmas
tree.
Yeah.
I'm not sure when they moved it, when that changed. I think what happened is for many years there was no tree on 4th and Adams. Probably as traffic got worse. I don't know, that pole couldn't be. It was right in the middle of the street.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just imagining 4th and Adams. That's Taroka, the Highliner. That's that intersection.
Oh no,
right?
it's just
that's next,
east
that's
of the
down,
bank.
Oh, so it's GCI.
Yeah.
So it's in that intersection.
Right,
It's
right.
You got GCI.
Right, yeah.
You've got the therapists there on the other corner in the Petro Marine building.
Yeah.
The Green Cube.
Right.
Yeah. So it's that, and then the park, Kawabi Park.
Yeah.
And then the bank formed that. So the bank, that's kind of an interesting story, not really keeping with Christmas, but specifically, but that bank used to be a different building, right?
Right. The original bank went up in very early. I'm trying to think. Probably probably. I think not in 1905, 1906. I think about the same time the Episcopal Church was going up, the bank went up.
Oh, yeah.
You see we have some pictures that show nothing in that spot except you can see just blocks, building blocks set up there, getting ready to build the bank. And then for a time, it was the oldest bank building in Alaska, still in operation. And then it was.
So was it condemned in favor of building the new?
I don't want to go into details because I don't know for sure.
Okay.
But I just know that it was just taken down very quickly. I remember.
Mm-hmm. It didn't burn in any of the fires.
No, I know. I mean, it was. I can understand from a business point of view. It's just probably just maybe too expensive
old,
to maintain. Yeah. It was old, but still, it was a historic building.
And so, in the center of that intersection with the bank was the Christmas tree.
Where the Christmas tree was, yeah.
Kind of a roundabout. Just you kind of navigated around the tree in the middle of the intersection.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think. This was in 30s, so there would have been more cars in the 30s, but it still apparently wasn't a problem.
Yeah, I was just wondering if they don't have no pictures. So Sylvia get out there with a camera and take a picture of the wreck at ran into the Christmas tree.
Well, you're talking about Sylvia Sexton.
Yeah.
Her studio burned down at one point, so she lost a lot of pictures.
Oh,
we lost a lot.
Yeah.
So I don't know. She may have taken some. I've never found a picture of that tree. Now maybe there is one. I found pictures that show the old flagpole, but that went back to like 1906, 1907.
Sure.
And so forth.
And she was just down where the Alaska shop is now. That's where her storefront was.
I think it was the other side of the building, the other side of the street.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So across from Brown and Hawkins side.
No. The Alaska shop's on the east side. Her place was on the western side of the street, further up.
Okay.
I'm not positive right now. I'll tell you a story.
Okay.
I was just telling this story to somebody the other day. One day, this was years ago, I was researching down in the basement of the library. I was going through all the Seward gateways from the 1920s. And I'd been down there for hours, and I looked at the time, and it was like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I hadn't had any lunch. So I said, I need to go get lunch. Now, I had been studying the downtown area in 1923. So I got in my car, I drove downtown, I parked the car, I got out to go to lunch, and I looked around, and the restaurant that I was going to go to wasn't there because it had been there in 1923.
Oh, little
time travel.
Yeah, I was going to say your brain just time traveled on you. Yeah.
Yeah, I just pulled in. I figured I'll go to this restaurant and have something. And then I said, gee, that was in 1923. Yeah.
So the storefronts along that. So there's the Oleander building still there, or Orlander building, and of course Brown and Hawkins has been a little bit of an updated.
Well, and the Sea Bean is in the old Alaska Commercial
Yes.
Company building.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they're in my research, there's particular times in Seward history where it is impossible to figure out all the businesses that are going in there because businesses are closing, new businesses are going in, and I think just in the 50 years I've lived in Alaska, I look at old pictures and say, oh yeah, there was a business there. This was here, that was there. It's really hard to track.
Yeah, be interesting. If you had a time lapse, but that would have taken a little bit of more pictures than we have.
Right. I mean, even if you want to find out who lived in certain houses, sometimes, you can find the plat information and everything, but you can't find out who's moving into the houses as they get sold.
Tracking the recording.
The recordings and all that. It's difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess they had a supermarket downtown until fairly recently.
Bob's Market.
Before they built the
Bob's Market. Yeah, that was. He had been out of town, and then he moved. He moved a branch in town because then across the street was the other supermarket where the Petro building is. Now there was another market.
Always they had grocery stores across the street from each other.
And you'd still go in there. I remember in the early '70s going in there, and people, you could walk around and shop, but the old timers would still go in and hand them a list. And
they go pick the list.
Pick the list up. I mean, we forget in the older, like if you went into Urbex in the early days, in the 1920s, you'd give them a list of what you wanted because they had to get the ladder out to climb up.
It's like Little House on the Prairie. The storekeeper Nellie's father.
Right.
Or any of the westerns are sort of true to history where you go and then the shopkeeper pulls your you don't shop.
Yeah.
You don't go up and down the aisles.
Right. So I mean, Christmas was always a special, and not Seward's just an example of a lot of small towns, but Seward historically had always been so isolated, particularly before the railroad went through. But even when the railroad went through, there was still no road out of town. So we did have that isolation, and we were only getting, I think in maybe 2 trains a week, even in the busiest.
So the holiday shopping scene was, of course, completely different. People shopped here.
Oh, people shopped here, yeah, and that's interesting because early in December the steamer would come in, and a lot of times the merchants they had to order their materials very early. You can imagine. A number of the merchants would go outside. They'd go to Seattle like in the summer, and they'd meet up with some of their providers, the businessmen, make deals. And in fact, that went on as late as I remember in the '70s. Skip Fletcher, who did the movie theater, at least once or twice a year, he'd go to Seattle to deal, or to probably to Los Angeles, I think.
Buying trip. Yeah.
The buying trip. Well, to book. Book movies and everything. Get a booking for them. So I mean, another little custom was all the businessmen going out to get the deals and maybe place their orders in the summer. Maybe get them for.
And there was a more straight line shipping situation too. You didn't have stuff delivered to warehouses in Anchorage and then come back down here by truck. Everything got sorted down here.
Right. For a while,
direct to your doorstep.
They did in the earlier days. They did have problems with. I think I write about this in one of the articles. I think this changed. It was cheaper. It was cheaper, and this is only for a short time. I'm thinking maybe not in the earliest days. It was cheaper to ship stuff to Moose Pass than it was to Seward. So the Seward businessmen had to have a truck. They'd drive out to Moose Pass and pick up their stuff and bring it back to Seward.
Because they did the switching out there and the sorting?
I don't know. I don't know why. I mean, this didn't go on for too long, but I think it would seem pretty.
Somebody had a corner on the market?
I don't know. There was a lot of politics.
Yeah.
A lot of politics.
That's what I was thinking. It sounds like politics to me.
Yeah. So, but people used to people did a lot of their shopping in town, but people still would shop with the Montgomery Ward and
the catalogs.
Sears catalogs and everything like that. There's this joke I read in an old Alaska newspaper. Some guy goes into a store and says, I want to buy a pair of boots. And the guy shows him a pair of boots. How much are these? This is how much they cost. I can get that for half the price at the Sears catalog. So the businessman says, I'll sell it to you for that. And the guy says, oh, okay. So the guy gives him the money. And he says, well, give me the boots. And he said, I'll give them to you in 3 months.
Oh, yeah. The stinger. Yeah. Uh-huh. You pay a price for convenience.
Right.
Or you
right,
should. You should
right.
be willing to acknowledge it. Right?
So I mean, people.
There's a cost to
Yeah.
stocking all these
Right.
things,
People
you know.
still use the catalogs, but they did. But as you can imagine, most of the shopping was done here locally, and I think part of it is just to support the local businesses too.
So it occurs to me that just going back to the Christmas tree, that you've got the story about the Christmas tree and how,
Yeah.
and how it brought the community together.
Right.
And that was at least the editorial in the newspaper. And so that was the tree in the middle of town, not the tree on the hillside.
No, that's the tree on the hillside.
Okay, so that's a different Christmas tree.
Yeah, the tree on the hillside went up in '61.
Okay.
Okay, I'm trying to. I think the tree at the corner of 4th and Adams went up in the 20s.
Right. It lasted until
I don't know.
through World War II, maybe.
Could be. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't know when it went
Okay.
down. Maybe there's. And it's hard to say.
We'd have to find a picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many of the old timers are gone now. I mean, we do have a few. That. But even the people born in the 30s now were little children in the 30s.
Yeah.
They have good
Time
memories.
marches on.
In the 30s, late 30s and 40s, they met some of the real old timers that were still around. So they still have good memories and good information about what those days were like.
Well, it's interesting. You'll see from time to time pictures. There's collections of pictures that are outside the community, like some, in the lower 48, sometimes far outside, and you'll see them on social media get posted, and it's kind of a revelation that there's other pictures out there that we don't have access to. Here.
That's a whole other story. What you've got to remember is that when people die, where's their stuff go? I mean, I know a lot about this because in my search for sources, that's how I find sources. I'll just give you one example. I don't know if you ever read my story about Edna Ware. Edna Ware was the World War I nurse that lived here in the last several years of her life. What an interesting story she had.
But public health nurse, or
she worked at Wesleyan.
Yeah.
Wesleyan, but she had been a nurse. She had been a nurse on the front lines in World War I. In fact, I don't think even today, we don't appreciate the woman that we had here in Seward. I mean, during World War I, there were about 10,000 Red Cross nurses that went to France. And they became, the Army said, okay, well, these nurses are good, but the Red Cross isn't going to give them the orders. We're going to give them the orders. So they were inducted into the Army, these nurses were. She was one of those 10,000 nurses. Out of those 10,000 nurses, I think only about 22 of them got what's called the Distinguished Service Medal. And that, I think that is the third or fourth highest medal that anybody can get. She got the Distinguished Service Medal.
Out of Seward.
Out of Seward. But we were getting to where I got my sources. I was hard to track down the family because she was married 5 times. Had one son, but he died before her. But I did finally find somebody, a niece or nephew or distant cousin or something, that had all of her stuff. I mean, all of her Army material, all the paperwork from her Army work, photographs, everything. And they gave all that to me. I've since donated that. That's down at the Resurrection Historical Society now, but I use that for all my research. So my point is, you find stuff outside. When people die, their stuff goes to family members who take it. Sometimes they don't even have a chance to go through it. They'll come to Seward and they'll take it with them. It's amazing what's in the Library of Congress and what's in the National Archives.
So if you could go spend some time there, every time you visit, you'd find something new.
I have,
Yeah.
And I'll tell you one thing that's at the National Archives that I tried to get sent to Alaska so I could use it up in Anchorage, but they wouldn't send it.
Well, and then they closed down the repository.
The repository here, yeah,
It's down
right.
It's down in Seattle or somewhere.
I think it was in the National Archives or the Library of Congress. But when there were big shipwrecks, the Marine Review Board has hearings on them. And the famous one we had in Seward was in 1946, the Yukon, the SS Yukon, went aground. And that was a big story. The survivors were brought to Seward. Big story.
So did that break up? Or is that still a shipwreck out there?
I think you can still see some of it out there, people tell me.
Yeah.
But anyway, the Marine Review Board, they had hearings in Seward, they had hearings in Anchorage, they had hearings in Seattle, maybe someplace else too. And all of that stuff, the transcripts of all the hearings and everything are in, I think it's the National Archives. Could be the Library of Congress, I'm not sure, but the Marine Review Board there. And I think there hasn't been a book, no one's written a book about the Yukon.
Wow, it sounds like something.
I don't think there's a
to your
book
list.
about it. Well, no, no. But the reason why it isn't as well known, 236 passengers and crew were on that ship, and I think there were very few deaths. I mean, under a dozen deaths. And the reason why it was so successful, I mean, the reason why we haven't heard about it is because it was so successful. The rescue
wasn't a tragedy.
wasn't a tragedy. I mean, in the rescue operation for the SS Yukon was an amazing operation. I mean, the weather was bad. It was terrible, so even getting it to it was a problem. They had mushers going across the ice field on top of the Kenai Mountains trying to get it.
Harding. Yeah.
No, not the Harding. It would be the one as a sergeant.
Oh, okay. Yes, yeah, Sergeant.
Sergeant Icefield. Yeah, they had
so they shipwrecked in Prince William Sound.
Not quite. No, they weren't quite in Prince William.
Hinchinbrook, somewhere around there.
Yeah, no, not even at Hinchinbrook. I can't think of the name of the area right now.
So the mushers were involved. Who actually affected? Was it just?
They were
fishermen?
trying to get out to them. They couldn't. It was so bad that the ships going out there. Some of them were still on half. Some of the passengers made it to land and were on the beaches, and some of the passengers were still on half of the ship for a while. The ship had broken half. It went aground on some rocks. I mean, it was just an outstanding rescue, amazing rescue. That someone ought to write a book about it. But getting back to that, there are a lot of pictures in families on. I've found. So I go to people's houses sometimes. And they'll say, here's some pictures we got, and I look through them, and I find things that we've never found before in there. Because at some point, if the children of the person who died takes the stuff away, they might be able to recognize some of the pictures. But once they get to the grandchildren, the grandchildren will look at them, they're not even going to know who these people are or the importance of them, and so stuff gets thrown away.
Yeah. The natural course of things.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. We want to save something for a future show. You want to
Yeah,
do
we'll
another
save
one?
it for a future show.
We'll
Yeah,
do
I've
one
had
this
a
week for New Year's.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can do something. I have a couple of other stories here, but they're longer ones. And I think we've.
Yeah, we've been rolling for 56 minutes.
Yeah.
So some of that was pre-show, but
Yeah.
Right. So we'll just call it. This has been SAKtown Talk on Solstice Day, December 21st, 2023, and far away from 1918.
Yeah.
And my guest has been here, Doug Capra, local historian and writer, and guide. Are you still doing the guiding?
Occasionally,
Yeah.
not as much as I'll get on call. I do some guiding with Rick Brown occasionally.
Yeah.
He'll call me out.
Venture 60 North.
Yeah.
Right on. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and shut it down.